الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So inshallah ta'ala we'll be continuing discussing the book Al-Mulaqis al-Fiqhi by Sheikh Salih Fawzan Hafidullah ta'ala. And the last lesson we had last week, we had discussed matters concerning al-ilah. So discussing concerning those ahkam as stated by the author rahimahullah. So we have ended that discussion, and we'll be now discussing another chapter regarding matter that relates to al-usra, which is family related laws. We mentioned ahkam al-Zihar. So we'll be discussing matters regarding al-Zihar and its rulings. Aywa.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillahi. Qala ma'allif hafidahullah. Chapter 6, page 451. Title Zihar. Zihar is the saying by a husband to his wife when he wants to abstain from having sex with her sexually. You are to me like the back of my mother. Sometimes the husband likens his wife to his sister or another woman prohibited for him due to blood relations, breastfeeding, or relations by marriage, instead of saying my mother by pronouncing Zihar. Zihar is prohibited according to the Quran. As Allah exalted be, He says, those who pronounce the Zihar among you to separate from their wives, they are not consequently their mothers. Their mothers are none but those who gave birth to them, and indeed they are saying an objectable statement and a falsehood. Surah Al-Mujadilah, ayah number 2. The meaning is that those men who pronounce Zihar say grievous and false words that the Sharia Islamic law disapproves of. Such words are mere lies and objectable statements that are definitely prohibited, for such a man prohibits for himself what Allah has not prohibited for him, making his wife sexually prohibited for him as if she is his mother, though she is not.
Aywa. That's the end of that set?
Yeah.
Okay, the author, Hafidullah, he started by discussing first regarding explaining what is al-Zihar. So he had mentioned regarding al-Zihar that he didn't go into linguistic meaning, and also he gave a meaning or definition in regards to this matter by way of what's the process, which is he mentioned that for a husband to say to his wife that he'll compare her to his mother's back. So for the husband to say to his wife, you are like my mother's back. So that will constitute what is called al-Zihar. So the ahkam of Zihar would apply to if these statements or something likened to this is said by the husband to his wife. So the ulama that have discussed the matter, and the Shaykh and someone give somewhat the meaning definition. So lugatan regarding concerning al-Zihar, concerning dhahar, which is something which is rukhub, something which is your back. So or something which is so that's concerned the meaning linguistically. And so within the Sharia, that are istila in the fuqaha, amongst the fuqaha, they have different meanings that are given, and of those means that are mentioned regarding concerning an yushabbah zawju, for a man to compare his wife to that biman yuhrim alayhi, compare his wife to the or that which is forbidden for him to marry regarding matters relating to al-wat. So the person to say that compare his wife or someone that is not allowed to marry by way of in relation to matters of intercourse. As what the Shaykh mentioned, the first matter that he discussed, the ulama, they have an ijma regarding cases. So the person was to make this comparison with his mother, his wife with his mother, then that is zihar with ittifaq al-a'imma. So if the case he's saying, my wife is like my mother, back, then, and he's talking to his wife, then that is zihar, and that's ittifaq. Then the next case regarding a person that comparing his wife to not his wife but to another of his family members that he's not allowed to marry. So that could be his grandmother, his sister, his aunt. So the person to say to his wife, for example, I said it myself, Anti alayya kadhuhri ammati, or my ukhti, that you are like, I'm comparing, you are like the back of my sister, or like the back of my grandmother. So the person wants to say this to his wife, so he's not using the word, say replacing the word with what? Mother to the word of aunt, grandmother, and the likes, or sister. There's a shaykh somewhat so with that of the ulama, that of the ulama that I mentioned, with the jumhur of the ulama, then this is considered to be zihar. Now, this is considered to be zihar. Imam Shafi rahimullah, kind of somewhat, which is in line with jumhur, but he cannot put some restriction where Imam Shafi rahimullah in Qadim, he takes the position that the only one that if is considered to be zihar, only if the comparison is made with your mother or your grandmother. So any other family members, female members, then it's not zihar. If, for example, your sister or your aunt. So it has to be either your mother or your grandmother. That's according to Imam Shafi. The third case they mention, and Qawl al-Jumhur, seems to be that anyone from your family members that you are not allowed to marry permanently, then they also, the same ruling applies. That's family members. The third case, if the person wants to say this regarding a non-family member, but a person that you are not allowed to marry permanently, but she's not a direct family member. So a person that, so it could be in that case, it could be that you're not allowed to marry forever, but you're not a direct family member. So it could be concerned that as a wet nurse, or your wet nurse, her daughter. So she's like your sister, because of that situation of a wet nurse, meaning a wet nurse you suckle from that lady. Or for example, your wife's mother. So they're not direct family members that you're not about. You're not allowed to marry them forever due to other factors. So also they mention, so you find that on this matter regarding non-family members, are you allowed or not allowed? Then also you find that a khilaf between the ulama on this matter, where Jumhur are concerned that anyone that you're not allowed to marry permanently, whether family members or non-family members, then the same thing applies. Because I said anyone which is ta'bid, anyone that you're not allowed to marry permanently, then the same ruling applies as that of your mother. Then the fourth scenario they mention, a case regarding a person that you're not allowed to marry, but it is muwaqqat, it is a temporary case. Example. Your wife's sister. Okay. So in that case, regarding concerning, or it could be, for example, your brother's wife. So in those cases, you cannot marry those class of women due to factor that exists at the moment. If those things change, and you could marry her. So for example, the example we gave regarding your wife's sister, or even, for example, your wife, and you can't combine between her and her sister. No, you can't marry your wife and her aunt. Nor can you marry so with your brother's, we call it wife, then those cases, but if those things were to be removed, that you're not with your wife, or your brother is not with his wife. So now that reason has been removed. That barrier has been removed. So with those ladies, does the same thing apply? Of the ulama who mentioned siyafana khilaf and ulama regarding case of those ladies that are muwaqqat, that you'll find that the Hanabila and also the Malikiya, they are that if you make the same comparison with your wife, sister, as zihar, then it applies. Because at this moment you're unable to marry her. At this moment, you're unable to marry her at this present time. Then, so it says that the Hanabila and the Malikiya, all that zihar applies in this case, even though it's a temporary scenario. Then the Shafi'iyya and the Ahnaf, all concerned in those cases, not zihar. So if you were to say that statement about your wife, about your wife's sister, then it is not considered to be zihar. So you will compare your wife with your present wife with her sister. Would it be her sister? Now, then it doesn't apply, according to the Ahnaf and the Shafi'iyya. So that's concerning that matter that is discussed regarding the category of woman that falls into it or does not fall into zihar outside of one's mother. Aywa. Then Then he discussed concerning the second matter, he discussed the author, rahimahullah, that he mentioned وَحُكْمُ. As for the hukum of zihar, he mentioned muharram. It is haram. And some of the ulama state that is concerned is haram, and also it will fall under kaba'ir al-dhunub, of a major sin. So a person was to fall into this, then he has fallen into a major sin based upon the type of the kafara that is mentioned, where it mentioned إِنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ مُنْكَرًا مِنَ الْقَوْلِ وَقَوْلُ الزُّورِ. So can someone mention that reason that it shows there's something which is something very serious, that you have done a serious sin, where they mention munkar al-qawl, that is an evil speech, and also like a lie. It's compared to a lie. So they mention as a major sin that a person will fall into in doing so by falling into al-zihar. Aywa.
Zihar was considered a kind of divorce during the pre-Islamic period of ignorance, the Jahiliyyah, but afterwards Islam repudiated it and considered it an oath requiring expiation. Thus, the man who pronounces Zihar and his wife are prohibited to enjoy one another by having sexual intercourse or even foreplay until the husband expiates his pronouncement of Zihar. This is because Allah exalted be, he says, and those who pronounce Zihar from their wives and then wish to go back on what they said, then there must be the freeing of a slave before they can touch one another. Surah Al-Mujadila, ayat number 3. Moreover, the Prophet ﷺ said to a man who pronounced Zihar from his wife, then do not approach her, i.e. do not have sexual intercourse with her until you do what Allah ordered you to do, i.e. until you expiate for it. Related by At-Tirmidhi, who deemed it a Sahih hadith.
So I mentioned a third matter which is regarding concerning zihar, that this practice that it existed in Jahiliyyah before Islam. So a practice that existed in Jahiliyyah before Islam, that a kuffar, but zihar for them equates is with a form of talaq. So when a person did this, then to be taken regarding zihar towards his wife, that comparing her to his mother back, then that would be considered to be a form of talaq in Jahiliyyah before Islam, pre-Islam. Then Islam came and kind of somewhat refined this practice and restructured this practice. So Islam came, so it did exist before Islam, but then Islam came and can somewhat restructured regarding this practice of al-zihar. So by way that I mentioned that it shows that then I mentioned that as for the ruling that applies, what is expected, that if zihar occurs, then what is expected, the husband, if he was to say this to his wife, that he cannot have intimacy with his wife until he has carried out certain acts, which is said kafara, and that will be discussed shortly. So he has to somewhat pay this kafara, this expiation for what he did before he can have intimacy with his wife. So the discuss concern is intimacy. So the rule applies to the husband and to his wife, that they cannot have intimacy until the husband have gone through a process of kafara, and that will be discussed. So it's more sort of between the husband and the wife. As for what they are not allowed to do until the kafara have been paid, that I mentioned jima, which is intimacies, having intercourse. So sexual intercourse is not allowed until he has paid the kafara. So that's an ijma between the ulama, that he's not allowed to have intimacy with his wife until he has paid out, is carried out the kafara. Then the second thing I mentioned, dawa'i, which is said that foreplay. So it's not intimacy, it is foreplay. So touching his wife, fondling his wife. Now, in the case of zihar, they discuss concern. So he mentioned regarding it also take the same ruling as that of jima. That according to, so it's a discussion between the ulama on that matter regarding, does the same apply where a person is forbidden to have foreplay with his wife until he has paid out his kafara. So they mentioned that as for this matter, you'll find that they mention the call of the Hanabila and also the Shaf and the Hanafiya, all the put in a person that even with foreplay you're forbidden. So just as intimacy is not allowed until you have paid out the kafara, the same thing applies regarding foreplay. So you're not allowed to have foreplay with your wife until you have paid out the kafara. So what applies to jima, intimacy, sexual intercourse, then also the same thing applies to touching off one's wife. Then they mention our foreplay. So, and then the second view on this matter, they mention, which is the matter of the Shafi'iyya, and also riwayat and some of the Hanabila, that it is allowed. So of those who mention that it is allowed, the thing that is forbidden, strictly forbidden, is intimacy. As for foreplay, they give some allowance. But Allahu Alam, that what applies concerning the first view seems more on point. The first view, which is you're not allowed also foreplay, also the same thing applies. Allahu Alam. So that's concerning those masail. As for what he mentioned here concerning the evidence regarding this matter, then he mentioned regarding the dalil concerning the hadith, that he mentioned rawahu at-Tirmidhi wa sahahu, that he mentioned at-Tirmidhi rahimahullah in his book, the hadithun, hadha hadithun hasanun sahih garib. So he mentioned in his book, hadha, but he owed the hadith to be authentic. Then this particular hadith that is mentioned, that the Prophet ﷺ said to the person, la taqrabha, that you're not allowed to go close to your wife, hatta taf'al ma amraka Allah, until you have done what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have instructed you. So they mentioned this hadith showing that you are not allowed to have foreplay nor intimacy until you have done what you have carried out the kafara. The hadith that is mentioned, there's some discussion regarding the hadith that Ibn Abdul Hadi in his book Al-Muharrar min ulama al-Hanabila, that all the hadith to be mursal, and the hadith being mursal, that is the more correct view on the hadith. Where the hadith, it has two set of it have been transmitted, in some cases mursal, which is the majority and the stronger narration to the Prophet ﷺ. Ikrama is from the tabi'in, so it is a broken chain. Then you have in some narration of Ikrama upon Ibn Abbas, or and Ibn Abbas, but that one there's some kalam about it. That narration, there's some kalam about that narration. I will mention that Abu Hatim and also An-Nasa'i in his book Al-Mujtaba, that he owes the hadith to be what is more correct. The hadith is mursal and not authentic. So the hadith is mursal, not authentic. Allahu A'lam. Aywa.
So the man who pronounces Zihar from his wife must expiate his Zihar first if he wants to have sexual intercourse with her. For Allah exalted be, he says, then there must be the freeing of a slave before they touch one another. That is what you are admonished thereby, and Allah is acquainted with what you do. And he who does not find a slave, then fast for 2 months consecutively before they touch one another. Surah Al-Mujadila, ayat 3-4. These noble verses indicate that it is obligatory for the husband who has pronounced Zihar to expiate for it before having sexual intercourse with his wife, and that his wife is prohibited for him until he expiates his pronouncement of Zihar. This is the opinion of the majority of the scholars in this regard.
Yes, so I mentioned the next matter, which is regarding concerning, so what is obliged upon a person to do who fell into this situation of Zihar. So regarding concerning Zihar, that the person wish now to go back to his wife and have intimacy with his wife, then there's certain thing that he has to do, which is a form of kafara. So he has to expiate, do certain things, so as to for that will allow him that he can go back to his wife. So they mentioned that the hukum of concern, the kafara, it is wajib. So regarding concern the hukum, the ruling regarding that is kafara, that has to be carried out, it is something which is wajib to be done. So it is wajib to be done, and aywa, so that's concerned the hukum, as mentioned the ayah of Mujadila regarding concerning tahrir al-raqaba min qabli an yatamasa. Then it mentioned before you can go back to your wife, then you have to free a slave, and also mention فَمَنْ لَمْ يَجِدْ فَصِيَامْ شَهْرَيْنِ مُتَتَابِعِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ يَتَمَاسَ. So also it mentioned regarding concern the person who wish to go back to their wife, that if you're unable to do the first, then you have to go to the second level, which is fasting for 2 consecutive months. So those are concerning that, and there's a third to be mentioned. There's a third regarding the kafara for the person that before he goes back to his wife, then he has to do so. They mention if the person by chance was to have, he did zihar, but by chance he did had relations with her before he paid off the kafara, and the kafara to be paid off in full before you can have intimacy with your wife. So the person was to didn't pay, but he had intimacy with his wife, then what to be done?
Fast for 2 months. Oh, sorry, no.
So the person, he fell in a case where that he used to do one of these three things to be mentioned, but it so happened he did any of them, but he had relation with his wife. So in that case, the person, he make istighfar, make tawbah for what he did because he had done something wrong, which is the procedure, the procedure to be followed. That first he pays off is kafara, or one of the kafara. Then after paying this, then he's allowed to have intimacy, but he didn't pay the kafara. So for this, then the person makes istighfar, a tawbah for what he did, because he, as they say, considered to be asim, that he had done sinful. Then just pay, stop, continue in any intimacy until he has paid off his kafara. Clear? Clear? He said no more intimacy until, because so what he did by having intimacy was wrong. So he discontinue any intimacy until after he has paid the kafara, because that needs to be done, carried out before he can go back to his wife. Aywa. Tafaddal.
These two noble verses indicate that it's obligatory for the husband who has pronounced Zihar, I thought I've read that already, to expiate his pronouncement of Zihar. The husband must follow the sequence of expiations mentioned in the aforementioned verses. He must free a slave if possible, otherwise he must observe fasting for 2 months consecutively, and if he cannot due to an illness or the like, the last alternative for him is to feed 60 poor persons. Allah exalted be He says, and those who pronounce Zihar from their wives and then wish to go back on what they have said, then there must be the freeing of a slave before they touch one another. That is what you are admonished thereby, and Allah is acquainted with what you do. And he who does not find a slave then fast for 2 months consecutively before they touch one another. And he who is unable, then the feeding of 60 poor persons. Surah Mujadila, ayat 3-4. In the aforementioned verses, Allah states that those who pronounce Zihar from their wives and then regret it and wish to return to normal sexual relations with them have to expiate for their pronouncement of Zihar before they touch one another. Such expiations can be one of 3 things. Emancipation of a slave. The expiation of Zihar can be through freeing a slave if the husband has any or is able to afford to buy one with his surplus money, and that is not needed to meet his essential needs and the needs of those whom he supports. The slave to be freed must be a believer, as Allah stipulates a believing slave for the expiation prescribed for manslaughter. Allah exalted be He says, and whoever kills a believer by mistake, then the freeing of a believing slave. Surah An-Nisa, ayat 92. Thus, according to analogical deduction, the slave to be freed in expiation for Zihar must be a believer as well, for the unrestricted ruling prevails over the restricted similar one. Also, the slave to be freed in expiation for Zihar must be free of any defect that badly affects his/her ability to work, for the emancipation is intended to free the slave and enable him/her to earn his/her living. This cannot be achieved if the slave is afflicted with a defect that badly affects his/her ability to work, such as blindness, paralysis, and the like.
Okay, so the author, Hafidullah, he discussed concerning the next matter regarding kafarat al-zihar. So what is said to be the kafara, the expiation for the person who fall into this, which is al-zihar. So they mentioned that tajib ala tartib, that becomes compulsory for a person to undo the zihar, that he has to go through, follow certain process, which is mentioned that the processes, he has to do one of 3 things. And that one of 3 things is based upon that order. So first, it's not by choice, the person chooses whichever of the 3, but is based upon the order, which is the first is regarding it, a-raqaba, where a person free a slave. So if a person either free a slave, or he pays the equivalent of a slave. If that's not available, such as the time that we're living in today, that slave not available, so if that is not available, the person go to the next step, If not available, the next step, which is Siyam Shahrain Mutatabi'in. The person, he fasts 2 consecutive months. Then if the person is unable to do so, due to the person may be ill, or the person also kibbur sin, the person may be very old in age, that a person unable to fast 2 consecutive months. Then he goes to the third in line. So the third in line, which is at'am or it'am sittina miskin, that a person he feeds 60 poor people. So that's the order. So the first, freeing a slave. The second, 2 months of fasting consecutive. And 3, the third is feeding 60 poor persons. So they mentioned that this is kind of somewhat the same type of kafara regarding a person of intimacy with his wife during Ramadan, during the fasting of Ramadan. So they mentioned that is a form of a very stern type of kafara for a person who falls into this act. Then after Hafidullah, he discussed concerning that what is meant regarding freeing of a slave, that is certain condition also attached to the slave to be freed. So the slave has to be, the slave also has to be a mu'mina or a Muslim. So the slave being freed must be from a Muslim, must be Muslim, non-Muslim not. So the person, the slave, has to be a Muslim, has to be freed or emancipate. Then also the second thing, the person that they're able to can function normal to fulfill their duties. So the person have any form of, handicapped, then they are not allowed. Then that slave is not. They do not fulfill the criteria. So if he be a slave but not unable to fulfill certain duties, then they be disqualified. So for them to be qualified, Muslimah, and also second that they are able, can function. So that's the requirement regarding that type of slave, that to be emancipated. Aywa.
Number 2, fasting for 2 successive months.
So it's the second. So it's the second regarding at the kafara. Aywa.
There are 3 conditions for the validity of expiating Zihar through fasting. Number 1, the husband must be unable to free a slave.
Just the first. So for the person to go to the second, he must not be able to can fulfill the first.
Number 2, the husband must observe fasting for 2 consecutive months, during which he is prohibited.
And it's all applied to the husband. Zihar is applied only to the husband, not to the wife, because he's the one who have put this upon himself and forbids his wife. Hey, Allah mustan.
She's chilling, right? Number 2, the husband must observe fasting for 2 consecutive months, during which he is prohibited to interrupt his fasting except for an obligatory fasting, like fasting the month of Ramadan. It is also prohibited to interrupt these 2 months of fasting except for an obligatory breaking of fasting, like that on the days of the 2 Eids and on the days of Tashriq, of Dhul Hijrah, and the 3 days following the sacrifice. Fasting those 2 months can also be interrupted if there is a legal excuse, such as an exhausting journey or an illness. Breaking the fast due to either of the above reasons is not an interruption of the consecutive 2-month fasting in expiation for Zihar. Number 3, the husband must have the intention of performing expiatory fasting for Zihar at the night preceding his fasting day.
Hey, so then after you mentioned Ahfidullah, you mentioned the third or the second regarding concerning those matters that attach to the kafara, and of those things that attach to siyam. So of those the things that attach for siyam to be deemed valid, that 3 things that he mentioned. 1, that the person is unable to carry through on the first, which is the free of a slave, emancipate a slave. The second that he mentioned that, and yasum shahrain mutatabi'in, that a person have to fast 2 consecutive months. So when a person start, then he goes right, he has to go, fulfill those 60 days or 58 days or 59. So when a person start, then he has to go for 2 consecutive months. He's only allowed to have a break in between, so he's not allowed to have a break in between except for a valid reason Islamically. After that, it could be that a person is traveling. So he's traveling up a day, then he can break fast and then continue on. So while traveling, then he has a valid reason not to continue the fasting. Or they mentioned that so fasting, or the person start, then Ramadan comes in. Then he fasts, stop doing his kafara for Zihar, and he fasts Ramadan. Then at Ramadan ends, then he continue what remain of his 2 months of Zihar.
3 months fasting.
Then he gets ill.
You understand? So any day that is missed, but those days that are missed have to be for a valid reason. Or a valid excuse, shar'an. Right? Or a person got ill. That illness we're concerned in a severe illness, who is unable to maintain a fast. So those are valid reasons, or it could be that days that is forbidden Islamically for a person to fast on that day, such as Ayyam al-Eid. So before now it coincide those days, those months, those 2 months, somewhat coincide with Eid. Then he's not allowed Ayyam al-Tashriq, then those days are missed because they have a valid reason that he's not allowed to fast those days. Aywa?
So the husband will still need to make up those days, for example, on Eid. He'll still need to make those 3 days up after the Yom Tashriq is finished.
So whatever day that he missed, whatever remained, for example, he has gone X amount. Then whatever for the days of Eid that he missed, then he just said if he missed the 45th, he's on the 45th day, and he missed 3 days of Eid. Then he just continues it. The next day will be what? 46, and continue on. So he just continue, pick up. They doesn't start completely over again, just because they're valid to miss those days. Then those days will be missed. Then he just pick up regarding the amount of days that remain. Then also discuss the third matter, that so the person was to break those days for invalid reason. The person was to break those days, so he'd have the sequence going, he's fasting, but one day decide that I'm not going to fast. You understand? 2 months, I want a break, and he can take a break. Then if he takes that break of a 1 day, take a 2 day break. He has to start again. Then he has to start again. So the only way that so if he takes a break, that break has to be a valid reason, a valid break, shar'an. If anything that is not justifiable Islamically, then he has to start the process again. Just as the kafara regarding as-sawm. Then the third matter that he mentioned regarding yanwi as-siyam min al-layl and al-kafara. Regarding concern to the person after the intention that for this kafara, you have the intention of to be from the previous night. So that regarding concern that an-niyah, previous night, is a matter which is highly contended between the ulama. Even regarding concern, so they're all concerning any fast that's considered to be wajib, then a person must have an intention from the night before. So the night before comes from Maghrib up until Fajr. The person has to make the intention to fast that day, that coming day. So I mentioned, so that's the night. Then is that wajib as a condition to his fast? So it's not highly contended, meaning a matter that is under discussion between the ulama, a khilaf between the ulama, and the evidence that they use regarding that it is a must. All those ahadith is daif or questionable. All the hadith regarding fasting the night before, that those hadith are, you understand, questionable. They are on the discussion. Both said those who hold yes, and those who hold it's not wajib but mustahab. Wajib, not wajib but mustahab, and those who hold it is wajib. You must have a intention from the previous night. Aywa.
Number 3, feeding 60 poor persons. There are 3 conditions for the validity of expiating Zihar through feeding 60 poor persons. The husband must be unable to observe the expiatory fasting. The poor person to be fed must be a free Muslim entitled to receive zakat. The amount to be given to the poor person must not be less than 1 month. a standard measure that equals 543 grams of wheat, or half a sa', a standard measure that equals 2,172 grams of any other cereals.
Hey, so they mentioned regarding the third group, the third matter concerning kafara, which is what? Feeding how many? 60. So feeding 60 poor people. I mentioned here one concern: those poor people should be Muslim, that those people are deserving of zakat. So those people concerned that that they're deserving of zakat. So it's to be given to people who are said to be poor or deserving of zakat, who would need some form of help. So a person who's wealthy, then they're not deserving. Or a person that is not considered to be poor, then they're not deserving of this type of kafara. So those who are considered to be in need, then the second, and they have to be Muslim. The second, after another condition I mentioned regarding concerning that, what's the miqdar, what's the amount that they are to be fed. So I mentioned what he says there regarding concerns mud min al-burr or nisf al-sa' min khayr al-salad. They have a discussion, but I'll enter discussion. So you have those, this is the method of the Hanabila, or some of the Hanabila, that they put this, they said that this measurement or this amount that the poor person, each poor person is deserving. So there'll be a certain measurement that they're deserving, the amount that is mentioned. So it could be mud min al-burr or nisf al-sa' or nisf al-sa' of other than this. So that's the view taken by the Hanabila. Others all concerned that nisf al-sa' for all categories of food item that is given, whether by way of rice or wheat or barley, everything is nisf al-sa'. Then you have Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, that all concerned that as for the nusus, the text that I've discussed regarding the amount or the measurement to be given to a poor person, there's no mentioned by way of text. Now, so somewhat atlaqa is somewhat I've left it open, that mention regarding concerning to the matter regarding what they are to be given is somewhat left open. As it mentioned, it's فَإِطْعَامُ سِتِّينَ miskina. So left open. So said the fuqaha, or some of the fuqaha, they have discussed between themselves as to what they think is the amount to be given to each poor person. Some have mentioned what the author have stated, which is said this is the view taken by some of the Hanabila regarding this amount. What Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah have taken the view regarding that there's nothing mentioned by way of Quran specific regarding the amount, nor anything by way of the Sunnah that is authentic regarding the amount. So the matter goes back to al-urf. Goes back to the concerning what is the traditional practice of the people. We are concerning feeding our person concerning a meal per day, a meal. Then that becomes the urf of the people, whatever it is. So it is not. So he mentioned. So his view that it's not set by way of this amount, but it is left to the urf, the custom or practice of the people, and that may change from one time to the next time, or from one place to another. But will be each given a meal. They discuss concerning a meal concerning whether it is rice, barley, wheat, or couscous. That should be given. All of them discuss that it should be given with some form of meat or some form of gravy, not just I said just plain rice. So to be given. So I'm not giving plain rice. Then give them something that goes along with it, because that's the custom. You understand? So that goes with it, unless man in jail. But overall, that it has to be with something, not just plain rice or just plain whatever. So that's concerning a discussion between the ulama on that particular matter. So the author rahimahullah, he mentioned regarding that a set amount, but we said that's also some discussion on that matter. Allahu a'lam. Aywa. They discuss the next matter regarding concerning the poor person. That the ayah mentioned فَإِطْعَامُ سِتِّينَ miskina, 60 people to be what? To be fed. Now, if I was to one individual and I'm going to feed him every day, the same person, but I'm going to feed that same person 60 every day for 60 days, is that valid? Is that a valid practice? For me to choose, a person to choose one person Brother Zaid or whoever, and I'm going to feed that person every day. We decided we're going to meet after 4 o'clock, after Asr. I'm going to feed you for the next 60 days as my kafara.
So you could either say, I'm going to give you breakfast, lunch, and then dinner for 20 days.
Hey, whichever way, so you're giving them 3 meals, but it's what the same person. You're going to give them 60 meal. Nam, is that allowed? There's a khilaf between the ulama. You have those who mention la yudzi, to just specify one person for those 60 days, 60 meal is not allowed. Nam,
But sorry, Omar, so see for the ulama that say you can,
hey,
say for instance, you just say, look, I don't know, a meal might be £5. So can you just give them £5 times 60 and just say,
if you pay him in cash.
yeah, that's
Hey, that's the next matter.
Okay.
Hey, so we come back to that one. So we had the one of specifying one person, and you're going to feed them a meal every day. Now, when you cook it, so they mentioned that as for some of the ulama that they mentioned, they have the ثلاثة أقوال قيل لا يجوز, that is not allowed, ولا يجزي, and it does not, is not valid. It is not valid and doesn't count. And that's called Jumun of the ulama. And amongst them, they mention Al-Malikiyya, Shafi'iyya, and the Hanabila. That specifying one person and feeding them repeatedly for X amount of 60 times, that does not count. And that's the call of Jumun of the ulama. We said the Malikiyya, Shafi'iyya, and the Hanabila. Then the second view, أنه يجزي, that it is permitted. The second view position is that it's valid. It's a valid act, or it's valid to be done. It is something which is allowed and valid to be done. The person to feed the same person 60 times, and that's the call of the Hanafiya. So the Hanaf, they hold that to feed one person repeatedly 60 times is yajuz. That's the Ahnaf. As I mentioned that. So where you want to repeat, so they mentioned it is yajuz. And the third opinion, concerning tafsil. So the third opinion, so we have the first view, not allowed. The second view, it's allowed. The third view mention fihi tafsil. They mention tafsil meaning what? They take it as if you are able to find 60 people are available, then you have to feed 60 people. So you can't just say you have to feed 60 people. If you can find 60, then you have to stick to that number of feeding 60 people, as the ayah mentioned, 60 masakin, nam or miskin. Then I mentioned that if you're unable to find 60, then you can go to one person. But that in the case that you're unable to find 60. So the original ruling that 60, if not, then you can feed one person. That's the tafsir that they own and are concerned with the view taken by in the Hanabila, or Riwayah in the Hanabila, and also Ibn Qayyim al-Jawzi rahimahullah is of that view.
One person for 60 days.
And that's the third view of an explanation. The first ideal, what is wajib that you find, if you are able to find 60 people, you have to feed 60 people. But in the case you're unable to find 60, you can only find one, then you can feed him. So that's concerning that matter. Aywa, Nam, Nakra.
In general, intention is a main condition for the validity of any expiation. For the Prophet ﷺ said, "Vary the correctness and reward of deeds depend upon intentions, and every person gets but what he has intended." Besides the Quranic proof, there is another proof stated in the Sunnah illustrating the legal ways of expiating for Zihar and their priority order. It is a hadith narrated by Khawla bint Malik bin Tha'laba, may Allah be pleased with her, who said, "My husband Aus ibn Sabah pronounced Zihar from me, so I went to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ to complain to him. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ disagreed with me about him, i.e. her husband, and said, 'Fear Allah, for he, i.e. her husband, is your cousin. He sallallahu alayhi wasallam kept disagreeing with me until the following Quranic verse was revealed. Certainly Allah has heard the speech of the one who argues, i.e. pleads with you, O Muhammad, concerning her husband. Surah 58, ayat number 1. The Prophet ﷺ then said, he should emancipate a slave. Then I said, he cannot afford it. He said, then he should fast for 2 consecutive months. I said, O Messenger of Allah, he is an old man who cannot observe fasting. He ﷺ said, then he should feed 60 poor people. I said, he has nothing with which he may give in charity. He ﷺ said, I shall help him with a basket of dates. I said, I shall help him with another basket of dates. The Prophet ﷺ said, that is good of you. Go feed 60 poor people on his behalf and return to your cousin. Related by Abu Dawood.
Some of the hadith it mentioned, I was said the hadith that you find that of the ulama authenticate the hadith, so you find concern to know of those who authenticate the hadith that they mentioned that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah all the hadith to be authentic, as in Fathul Bari, and also Ibn Turkamani that also authentic, also of contemporary Sheikh Arnaut and Sheikh Albani that all the hadith to be authentic, which is this is the hadith al-Hasan. So it said from the hadith it shows regarding that the person follow that procedure, that line, that the person fall into Zihar, that one, the way of expiation, kafara, that feeding, the first who said is, or the hadith mentioned, that emancipating a slave. If not able, then a person goes to the next line, which is fasting 60 days, or shahrain, or 2 months, 2 consecutive months. Then the third is that a person feed 60 poor people. Then it mentions, no, he doesn't have anything. So the wife said to the husband, he's somewhat miskeen, he doesn't have anything to give. Regarding concern, all the other things is somewhat difficult for him from the first to second, and also the third, where he's unable to find food for 60 people. So what to be done? So they mentioned that if the person unable, that's concerning that sakat al-hukum, that everything now falls, that the ruling is removed from the person because he's unable to fulfill what is required. Or baqiya fi dhimmati, or it still remain in his, it's still something that he still owes to be done whenever he's able. So in this case, the Prophet ﷺ others can someone else to support him in finding food to pay for the 60 people. So it shows that people can assist a person regarding these kafara, that others can step in and assist the person regarding his payment for the kafara. Naam Sheikh, tafaddal.
وتتم الصلاة القائمة آتي محمد الوسيلة والفضيلة والرحمة المودرة وأدى إنك لا تخلف الميعاد.
Aywa.
As we see, our great religion, Islam, offers solutions for all kinds of problems, including marital ones. As shown above, Islam has solved the problem of the Zihar that used to be a dilemma during the pre-Islamic period of ignorance, when people had to separate the marriage couple as a solution, causing their family breakup. What a great religion Islam is, alhamdulillah. In addition, our religion, when ordaining the expiation for Zihar, gently considers the conditions of the husband, and thus the husband can free a slave, observe fasting, or feed poor people according to his ability. All praise be to Allah for that.
That's the end.
That's the end.
Hey, so at the end, concerning so the question that you asked regarding that is the person able, if rather than feeding, actually giving food, that give them in the form of cash, now then no, that's to be in a form of food. So the person has to buy the food or ensure if the money is given, or the person that they use that money to buy food. So that's to be the final thing has to be in the form of a food.
Do you know, with regards to the different stances of the age of 60 people, said that you can feed the same person 60 times? Then the Hanabila in Josie had the opinion that if you can't find 60, then you can feed the same person over 60
Yeah.
times. Who had the position that you have to find 60 people? Is that the...
It's a jumhur of the ulama, the first opinion that one person is not sufficient, he has to find 60 people or feed 60 people. Jumhur of the ulama, the Malikiyah, the Shafi'iyah, and the Hanabila. You have some other masail that are mentioned regarding this matter, but this can somewhat give us a general idea of matter regarding Zihar.
The people you have to find, do they have to be from your locality, or you can know someone?
So that they mentioned, there's an itlaq that you find 60 people. The condition that they have to be Muslim and the people are deserving of zakat. So whether those people are local to you or somewhat away from you, distant, but they've fulfilled that criteria, then it can be done. That it's service purpose. So it's always been better regarding zakat and those things to deal with those people that are in your locality. That's always better, but it's not wajib. So that inshallah, those are from the main masail or some of the masail that relates to Zihar. There's other things that are mentioned, but we'll keep it to this inshallah. So that inshallah will end. There's one matter they discuss. We mention it. They mention the person to say to his mother or to his wife, "Anti alayya ka ummi." Anti alayya ka ummi. That you are to me like my mother. So in this case, he didn't use the word back. You with me? So in this case, he didn't use the word, but he said, you are like my mother. To me, you are like my mother. Is this ziyar? So the ulama in this matter, they mentioned that it goes into that one who mentioned that it looks to his intention. So if his intention was that, so of those who mentioned that if he had no intention, regardless of the, in a way of zihar, then it is not taken. Where maybe we said, anti alayya ka ummi, where the person might intend, where his intention in the first case that he intend to do that form of ihtiram, is trying to do that form of to honor his wife or to praise his wife. So he says, no, you to me are like my mother, instead of, no, my mother care for me and look after me, then you're like fulfilling that role. So it is done in a form of to praise his wife. Right? So it's not done to, like I said, belittle her, but instead to praise her. Then it is taken as such. Then there's no zihar with ittifaq. Because the intent by this is a form to praise his wife. By mentioning, no, you're like to me like my mother, or my mother care for me, look after me, then you understand, you're taking on that role. So you tend by way of to praise his wife. Then they mentioned that one is not zihar. Then the next one they mentioned that his intention is zihar, but didn't mention the word dhahr. Didn't mention back. Dhahr ummi. He didn't mention back of my mother. So they mentioned that, but his intention was zihar, but he didn't per se use the word back. So with this, the ulama mentioned regarding concerning with that matter, that is, as I mentioned, it's zihar. Based upon his intention. So maybe the words were not in place, but his intention will be now the thing that will be the deciding factor. Then another case where he mentioned, but he has no intention to be he didn't intention to, it wasn't meant to praise her, nor to compare with his mother in a negative way. So he had just no intention, this way or that way. What's the ruling? Clear for the third?
No.
So also not matter that you find a khilaf between the ulama, those who mentioned that which is called or right consider that it is not counted as zihar. Naam, it's not counted as zihar. Those who mention it is. But the correct thing in these, you understand, they mentioned so the order would be that just something had been said, but because there was no intention attached to it, and zihar, that I'm not sure we have read it, that it requires that mention that. So it includes the act of ibadah that, or an act that not per se act of ibadah, but it requires a niyyah. Because there's no intention involved, then it doesn't count. I want to mention that in those cases, for a person, the mufti is going to somewhat to get clarity as what a person intend. Because what the person actually meant or intend, or what he intend when he said these words, then those things to be looked into. So those are some of the masail that relates to this. With that, inshallah ta'ala, we'll now end this matter regarding of those ahkam regarding al-zihar, regarding said no more so this apply a husband saying things that he shouldn't say towards his wife. Aywa.
Can the harm be made by mentioning another body part other than the back?
Yeah, they mention, yeah. Hey, they mention. Hey, they. Yes, so the many you have also that they discuss. So the person might say himself like a button, nam, or a ras. See, khilaf. Those if you say button is like the other side of the back. The mentions no. That's more. Those who say yes, or the person that has mentioned just a ras or ridge. You understand? You have a lengthy discussion regarding that matter. They will mention it can count if the person, for example, you say ras, we maintain the full person. Nam, but you said they said this thing which is munfasil wal mutasil. So thing that is attached to the person of those things, and some mention that are things that you can as the husband can you have delight with. Nam, so if you will say to the use her neck, the back of her neck, then no one really mess with the neck. Well, but today the foot. Well, today is a different world we're living in. Now, so a different world. So some of those ahkam can change and say, so those things concerns that so the person might use the foot. But as I said, things change now, isn't it? You understand? So that's a part of the discussion. That you just mentioned a portion of the body, adun min adha. You mentioned a portion of the body, not the full thing. Some said it applies if that portion is taken as the full person, or can be considered to be a meaning you meant by this the full person. But if you just meant a proportion, the and, then no. Or they said no because it is munfasil, or it is muttasil, depending on. So you have that discussion also between the ulama.
Anger, can they absorb themselves, or to say out of anger physically?
It then counts still. It still counts. It's not a divorce, so it still counts. There's even the person, the young boy, who's able to, they said anyone who's allowed to divorce, then it applies. Anyone who's allowed that they can divorce their wife, then the ruling, if it is said, it applies to them. طيب خلاص وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذا السبيل.